Hi, welcome back to another episode of Akiona Law Podcast, wherein we talk about everything intersecting, relating to family law and divorce. I am Ululani Lani Akiona, and today we continue on part two of our conversation with family law firm leader, guardian ad litem, and parenting coordinator, Elise Buie. Welcome back to the show, Elise. So glad to have you here again.
Thank you so much for having me, Lonnie. I really love chatting with you.
Yeah, and that was such an interesting conversation that we did, talking about guardian items. I learned so much, and I enjoyed hearing. I enjoyed hearing your story too, especially that transition now about doing the interviews via Zoom and I'm still thinking about what you said about how kids say the darndest thing, and that was just great.
Kids are awesome.
You got to listen to the first podcast so you know what we're talking about. So now another fascinating line of work that you do in addition to the guardian ad litem is you do parenting coordinator. And it's so interesting that, I do King and Snohomish County, but in Snohomish County, the courts mostly rely on the guardian ad litems and not the parenting coordinators. Can you explain for our listeners out there, what is a parenting coordinator?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, and I was going to say, and what's the difference between the parenting coordinator and a guardian ad litem?
Well, a parenting coordinator is not doing any investigation. A parenting coordinator has a parenting plan usually already in place and a court order setting forth what their roles and responsibilities are. I mean, I have been brought in some cases under a temporary family law order where a residential schedule was set up early on in the case, and I've been brought in because the case is such high conflict. But mostly you get brought in at the very end, so once the case is settled or even gone to trial and a permanent parenting plan has been entered. And as part of that, there will be the appointment of a parenting coordinator in some cases. Often a parenting coordinator is recommended by a guardian ad litem. I mean, there are many cases that I have done as a guardian ad litem. And my recommendation, my number one recommendation is to get a parenting coordinator on board that they don't need a bunch of things. They just need to not be dealing with each other, and they need somebody to operate in between them. And that is what a parenting coordinator does. A parenting coordinator operates often in between a high conflict couple, or it could be a couple that's maybe got one person with some mental health issues or substance abuse or something. So you're operating in the middle of this couple, and you're ideally trying to educate them on how to communicate in a way where they kind of let go of their spouse brain or their, intimate partner brain, and they put on I call it the co-CEO's hat. So they put on their co-CEO hat and they're trying to maximize their child or their children. And you're teaching them how to do that in a business-like, professional, respectful way so that they can make decisions that are timely and developmentally appropriate for their children, but without getting in this spiral. Like sometimes I know you see high conflict families can get in spirals about nothingness.
Yes. I've seen it. So let me get this correct there. So the parenting coordinator. So the GAL or guardian ad litem will come in at the beginning of the case, technically at the temporary hearing. And the GAL will make recommendations as to what a final parenting plan will look like. So then the parenting coordinator comes in once that final parenting plan is entered.
Actually, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because an actual court order will be signed, a parenting coordinator court order. And so in that order, it'll set forth, what the parenting coordinator's roles are.
So how long does a parenting coordinator stay on board with the family?
That all depends on the court order. I mean, I've had cases where I've been with certain families for multiple years. I've had cases where I've been with a family for 6 months. I've had cases where I've recommended that a parenting coordinator come on when children are 1 and 5, and they're going to stay on until they go to college. And
what?
Oh yeah. Well, there's some families that they truly can't do it together, but each parent brings value to the child's life We just have to keep them not dealing with each other.
Right.
And they're able to bring value on their own. They're just not able to bring value in a way that it's ever, kind of integrated.
And because obviously, and it's tough because when you and I've dealt with I had the worst high conflict case ever. I think it went on for about 6 years, and it was here in Sonoma. It was in Snohomish County, and I was so disappointed because of we had a guardian litem in the case. And one thing I was advocating for and pushing, and this was because I had gone to the AFCC conferences, and if in case you missed part one, AFCC stands for Association Family Conciliation Courts. I may not be saying that right, but Association of Family Conciliation Courts. And Elise and I had talked about, they put on these seminars where they really mesh kind of the mental health piece aspect of family law and with also the legal aspect of it too. And it's really enlightening when you're dealing in family law and divorce to there's no other place where you can get that melding of mental health and law, except for Association of Family Conciliation Courts, webinars, seminars, things like that. So based on my education with them, I was like, these people, they cannot get along. They just cannot communicate with one another. It's always this barbs of what the other parent is not doing right or wrong. And as we talked about in the first episode, a lot of it had to do with food, where you've got one parent who's really into the children need to eat a certain way and they need to eat healthy, and the other parent that's just not the higher priority for them. And both parents love their kids, but they just don't agree with how the other is parenting, and therefore it's just conflict, and ultimately the children suffer. And I said, and I was practically begging the court, can you please get a parenting coordinator? These people cannot communicate with each other. They're in constant conflict and it hurts their children. We need a parenting coordinator. And it just got completely dismissed. And I couldn't think of any other case. If you've been in litigation for over 6 years, why not have a parenting coordinator? And I just don't know. I don't know if it's an issue of cost, or if maybe they just truly didn't understand. I honestly think dad was so controlling that no matter what mom suggested, dad was going to say no. But it was just so unfortunate that even the guardian litem said, oh no, they don't need a parenting coordinator in this case. And I know that this guardian litem had taken classes from AFCC because I've seen her at a seminar, and I was just livid.
Well, it's frustrating because to have a family in litigation for 6 years, I mean, let's be serious. We want to talk about cost of a parenting coordinator. The cost of litigation far exceeds the cost of one parenting coordinator.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I mean, the cost of the children's therapy that they're going to need because they are subjected to constant conflict is going to be quite pricey as well. And I think it is a huge mistake. And I think we see it often in Snohomish where the court is hesitant to appoint a parenting coordinator. I think there's a lack of understanding about the process and about how it can help the process. And I think that we practitioners have to do everything within our power to educate the court, commissioners, and judges on how much conflict damages children. It is not the divorce. It is not living in two homes. It is not that one parent does organic broccoli and the other parent does cheap macaroni and cheese. It is the conflict that is the problem.
That is so true. My kids love that Kraft macaroni and cheese.
So do mine, unfortunately. I think I'm doing really fancy because I buy them Annie's. And I'm like, look at you, you're getting like organic macaroni and cheese, and they're just like, you're ridiculous.
No, they're like, no, we want Kraft. I try to do this. I try to mix peas and carrots. I get frozen peas and carrots, I steam them, and I put it in there. But no, nobody wants that. They just want the plain Kraft macaroni and cheese, no vegetables. And it just kills me, but I'm just like, I gotta let it go. Let it go. So yes. So what would you tell the courts or the commissioner or listeners out there about how this parenting coordinator can help people? Because and like I'm like in my head, I'm trying to think like, okay, so like if I'm the parent and I would be like, oh, I'm so mad because he fed the kids Kraft macaroni and cheese and they didn't have one piece of damn vegetable that night. Is that what these people are reaching out to you for?
Sometimes, yeah, for sure. I mean, and the thing is what the parenting coordinator is supposed to do is be that buffer. So be in the middle of them. And in some cases, that looks like they're never going to see each other's name on an email. Like in some cases, I'm going to say like, send me, only me, whatever you need to send me. I'm going to rephrase it, put it in, solid BIF language where it's brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And I'm going to then send it off to the other parent. And after I've made my edits and fixed it, so then we can get a decision. And that other parent isn't going to be triggered by what was initially sent to me, like my psycho ex is, serving macaroni and cheese. And I'm over here with my blanched organic broccoli that I picked out of the yard. And like my children are suffering. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, there's that methodology, but then there's some couples, I actually encourage them to include me on their communication. And, like they're able to communicate some, but they kind of aren't great at it. So I'm going to teach them how to do this. I'm going to like rewrite an email and I'm going to say, thanks, Susie Q, for your email. Let's rephrase all this. And I'll literally put in there in red. I'm like, see my notes below in red, and I will rewrite it. And then I'll be like, okay, Jack, now you can respond to this request. So they've watched the process of how to change their communication, because the goal is that I can get out and they can start doing this on their own. Now, obviously that's not always the goal. Some couples that it's just not practical. They won't be able to do it. But some couples clearly will be able to do it. If I have 6 months, 12 months with some families, I mean, we can revolutionize their communication.
Ah, interesting. And so how do you phrase that when you have it? And again, we're not trying to advocate Kraft macaroni and cheese here. We're not trying to promote that product, but how do you, how do you turn around that email where you have an upset parent who is upset because the other parent is maybe feeding them pizza for dinner or feeding them macaroni and cheese for dinner, not the vegetables?
Well, the reality is, I mean, I'm going to help educate both parents that we don't get to control what happens in each other's homes. Like that's a no-go. You're separated or divorced, you're living in separate homes, and all you both need to be are good enough parents. I mean, no court is going to take away a kid from a dad, and I'm using a dad as an example. It could be a mom who's serving their kid pizza with no vegetables. I mean, that's not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? And so we have to learn how to let certain things go. And, maybe whoever is the organic broccoli type, maybe they're going to have to squeeze in some more vegetables on their time, because they're concerned. Maybe they're going to have to talk to their child about advocating for their own nutrition. I mean, some children love vegetables and they will learn to advocate to eat well. The other thing I encourage parents to do, and often I will institute it, is I'll get their pediatric records. And I'm like, let's look at your child's medical records. Are there any concerns here about your children's nutrition from how are they growing and how are they developing? Because the reality is, I mean, children will likely be fine with eating organic broccoli just with one parent.
Right. No, how does it come up? That you bring up a good point about how you look at the pediatrician records. And I've had this come up before where where I had one parent telling me my son has a glucose or even a lactose allergy. And every time he goes to dad dad disregards it and gives the kid, milk or ice cream. So as a parenting coordinator, how do you deal with that type of a dilemma?
I would bring in the medical professional. I would figure out either from the records, whether such an allergy has actually been diagnosed, Or is it just a parent has self-diagnosed via Google that this is what the child has? So we
Yeah,
always
Google.
we have to be wary of the Google doctor diagnosis.
Trusty old Google.
Yes, exactly. So Dr. Google sometimes gets it wrong. And
Okay.
so, bringing in that professional, and I mean, that might mean I'm calling that pediatrician and I'm having a conversation with that pediatrician. Like, if I don't see that lactose intolerant allergy test in the records, I'm going to find out, like, is this something you've diagnosed? Is this something you've had concerns about? Has this been brought up in appointments? What do I need to do to make sure that that child best interests are happening, and we're all following the parenting plan? And obviously part of my role is making sure we're all following the parenting plan. So if there's a dispute, I'm going to be looking to what is that dispute resolution clause in their parenting plan? How are we supposed to resolve things? Most of the time when a parenting coordinator is put in place, I am charged with the ability to decide. And so oftentimes I can make a recommendation, obviously, because, Washington law is that a judge always has the final decision on the best interest of a child. They can bring my decision into court and fight it. Anybody can say, like, no,
Right.
she's dead wrong. Like, you know what I mean? And a judge could take a different approach. And sometimes there's actually an arbitration. Like, oftentimes in these very high conflict cases, there'll be a parenting coordinator who gets to decide, then they'll go to arbitration, then they'll go back to court. So, I mean, they might have 3 layers of decisions that they have to get through.
Okay. So that's interesting then, in that type of aspect where, let's say there is a documented lactose allergy and you talk about it with the dad and you say, I've spoken with the pediatrician, this is a real thing. And dad remains obstinate and is like, no, I'm going to feed my kid ice cream. He loves it. And then you make a decision and you say, do not feed your kid ice cream. It is not in his best interest. Is that how it works out?
Yeah, I would write a mini letter type thing, like a report almost. And I would, put forth what the dispute was, what I did, and then I would make my recommendation. And, and then either parent could take that on through their dispute resolution process, as they deem fit.
Okay, that's interesting. And so you talked about how you're trying to, when you're working with couples together, and you mentioned how it really is, people have to exercise their muscles in terms of communication and co-parenting. And, we don't, it's not like, it's something you have to learn, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're working with couples, do you assign them certain books to read? Like, you mentioned brief, informative, friendly, and fun.
Firm.
Oh, firm. I'm sorry, fun, not fun.
It's William Eddy's, that's his acronym, William Eddy, who runs the High Conflict Institute.
Yes.
But often in my parenting coordination work, depending on the facts, most parents, I mean, I would say solidly like 95% of them, they have to read the co-parenting handbook. And sometimes I assign it out chapter by chapter. And that is written by Karen Bunnell, who is a practitioner here on the east side of Seattle. And she is just a ninja with co-parents and just does an amazing job. And if I'm dealing with a family that's got really interesting step family dynamics or dating dynamics, I'm going to have them read the step family handbook, also written by Karen Bunnell. And we're going to go through that because there's a lot that they can learn, especially with the co-parents handbook, about what is their ideal, like what are we trying to get to here? I mean, I find if I can get both parents to read the co-parenting handbook, they can understand what it should be looking like. And so then when they're falling short and they're having a problem, we can say, okay, wait a minute. We've all read chapter 4. Like, let's go back and read it again. This is our goal. Let's try to get here. And so really working with them on education around how their conflict is damaging their children is one of my highest goals as a parenting coordinator, because I want them to be able to do it without me. I don't want to be with somebody's family for 6 years, 7 years, where they're paying me, not paying for their kids to, go to soccer or something. Like I want the kids to keep all their family money in their family and not be paying me. And so the more I can help teach them how to communicate, the better. And I have to say, I mean, I have a case right now that I think I've been on for several years. They just keep me CC'd on everything. They have not had problems in several years, but I bet the minute they stop CCing me, they would have problems again. So they just keep CCing me, and it's pretty simple. I read emails from them every 3 days. I'll just run through, make sure they're having no problems, and it's all good.
Wow, that's interesting. They're just CCing you.
They do. They just, it kind of like I'm there, just like, I mean, one of them made a comment that like, I feel like it's like having big sister on all the communication, you know? And I was like, whatever works, you know, but it's kind of like when people use OFW, Our Family Wizard.
Right.
I find sometimes if you pull people out of their text and you get them onto Our Family Wizard, all of a sudden they do better.
So in terms of the parenting coordinator, so do people not, I'm trying to figure out, would you recommend that people use Our Family Wizard or not if they're just CCing you on these communications?
Well, I think Our Family Wizard offers a lot more than just a communication platform. I mean, I always recommend Our Family Wizard because one, I think it just allows families to keep all their data in one place where there's no mystery about, you know, where the medical records are, where the expense records are, where the school records are. And it just is so simple. I mean, trying to teach parents, like, you know, some people will say like, well, I took the kids to the doctor and, you know, and now dad is asking me for the after doctor report. And I'm like, why does he have to ask? Like, why didn't you take a picture and upload it into Our Family Wizard so that the information is there, just like you would want that exact information if he took the children to the doctor? And it's just part of being a respectful co-parent is you share data about the children in as simple a way as possible, because one parent should not act as a secretary to the other parent. But I mean, you've got to share the data, just like in an intact family. I mean, most parents in an intact family don't all go to the doctor together. You know what I mean? Like often people are busy and one person might go, but you need to share what happened. I mean, the other parent should know what happened at the doctor's visit, and Our Family Wizard allows for that so simply and so inexpensively.
But couldn't it be too, in terms of, so one parent doesn't have to be a secretary? Do you recommend, or do you tell parents, well, hey, you know, hey, mom, if you're signed up to receive these records, hey, dad, why don't you sign up to receive these records too?
Oh, of course, both parents should be signed up, but mostly when you go to a pediatrician appointment, they hand you an actual paper copy of the visit.
I see what you're saying.
Don't send anything else out. And for sure, could another parent pick up the phone, call the doctor, ask them to, you know, send over the record? But should they have to do that? No, they shouldn't have to do that. A parent should be able to click a picture on their phone, upload it to Our Family Wizard in about 10.5 seconds, and that should just be what happens.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
It should happen both ways. I'm not at all saying just one parent should do it. Both parents should always be sharing the data.
Okay, so you do highly recommend then, and parties using Our Family Wizard, especially when there's a high conflict case, regardless of where there's a parenting coordinator or not.
Absolutely. And I mean, that allows lawyers to look in and see what's going on too. I mean, if a lawyer is really doing their job and their client does have Our Family Wizard, I mean, you can look in and see things rather than rely on what your client tells you, because often what our clients tell us has a bent that might not be fully accurate. And so being able to see the communication is very helpful.
So in terms of, I would think, especially in my experience with high conflict cases, you've got, it's occurring daily.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, there are families that I have been engaged with daily. I mean, where things happen daily. And, you know, and it's literally, I mean, I've had one family where I literally think to myself in the morning, I wake up and I'm like, I wonder what kind of glitchy thing is going to occur today. And you just know that that's going to happen. I mean, and it does get better though over time. Like I find that as they start getting away from litigation and away from their attorneys, and I don't mean to attack us attorneys, but I mean, we can cause a lot of the conflict, and the more they can get away from us and away from litigation, the better they tend to be. And the more they're educated around the damage the conflict is doing to their children, most parents are not intentionally trying to damage their children. And when they can truly understand how their behavior is negatively impacting their child, many parents will turn the mirror on themselves and try to make some adjustments.
That makes sense. And you suggested that, you said one of the books you mentioned that people read is the Co-Parenting Handbook by Karen Bunnell. And we also talked about BIF, Brief, Informative, Friendly, and Firm by William Bill Eddy. Are there any other books that you have the parents read when you're working with them as a parenting coordinator?
No, those are the main ones we read, except the Fair Play. I have just started encouraging people to read Fair Play because that is such a great book and just philosophy on how to divvy up the tasks of a family. So in a divorce setting, it's particularly helpful because the whole model is how to conceptualize, plan, and execute all the tasks of a family. And the whole idea is that one person must own the whole card. They must own the conceiving, planning, and executing. Like you can't divvy it up in the middle because then there's miscommunications and things fall through the cracks. And so the thing that's probably the most compelling is when you get the Fair Play cards along with the book, you see just how many tasks are involved in raising a family and in just running your life. And obviously in many homes, historically women do a lot of this mental load and kind of this second shift work. And it's a real issue in divorced homes about, you know, if parents are especially trying to do a 50-50 plan. I always tell my clients, a 50-50 plan means you're 100% parents. I mean, you've got to be on your game to be a 50-50 parent. And so the Fair Play system allows you to go through, divvy up your cards, divvy up all the tasks, and make sure that, you know, you're doing what's important to you and you're agreeing to do what you're agreeing to do, and things don't fall through the cracks.
I just pulled it up on Amazon. Fair Play by Eve Rodsky, Rodsky. It looks like the hardcover price is $21.92, but of course you can get it cheaper if you buy a used. Kindle's $10.99. And there's a quote here. Reese Witherspoon says, a hands-on real talk guide for navigating the hot button issues that so many families struggle with.
Oh yeah.
And, you know, she's a co-parent with her ex.
And it's kind of game changing. I mean, Fair Play is truly game changing.
I'm going to go ahead and pick that up.
Yeah, I really highly recommend it. It's a great recommendation for any client that's going through divorce, for sure.
Just going through divorce in general, then, not necessarily 50-50.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to see if this would be helpful for relocation.
Relocations are tough, as you know. It's hard to split that baby.
It's hard, but I always try to put the positive spin that, well, hey, instead of seeing the child every other weekend, you know, you get this larger consecutive chunk of time.
Well, and I think a lot of parents, I mean, now I mean, I'm going to just be really transparent and say that, I mean, we had our own relocation in our family where I relocated out to Washington and my ex was in Minnesota. We actually did a thing when we bought our house in Seattle. We bought a house large enough that there was a room that he could come stay in. And
wow.
My current husband and I had a second home. And so we could go to our second home and he could come stay in the home. I mean, and it really made a difference in allowing him to have time with the children on their turf, you know, so that he teachers and friends and actually do those things. People can do a lot of things by putting their children front and center rather than having them caught in the middle. I mean, because I'm not at all saying my ex and I were close,
Right, right.
but we definitely were committed to putting our children front and center in all the things.
Wow. That's a interesting solution to that problem where, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I was in a case one time where they were doing a 50-50, and instead of the parents would take turns out of living in the primary home.
Yeah.
So
Nesting.
yeah.
That's called
So,
nesting. Yeah.
so what is it called again?
Nesting.
Nesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've had a lot of families do that.
This was like way back when. This was like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And so it was a very novel solution at the time, where the dad basically got an apartment, and when it was mom's time with the child in the home, he stayed in the apartment, and vice versa. When it was his time, he was back in the home, and then mom stayed in the apartment. And then the kid didn't have to go back and forth, and it was dad's idea. And I think it goes because dad was trying to figure out, what's the least impactful for this young boy.
Right. Well, and there's big financial implications too when you go back to what you mentioned about relocation. A lot of times, if a parent wants to enjoy time with the child on the child's kind of primary turf, they're looking at a hotel or an Airbnb, or,
Right.
the things really become expensive. And no child actually really wants to go chill at a hotel, with their parent who's just flown in, when they have a home in that same city. It's tough.
Right.
It's a tough sell for kids. And so I think parents have to really think creatively and think outside the box and really try to put their children front and center of their decision making. And these things look different too developmentally. Like what works for an 8-year-old is not going to work for a 16-year-old. And I think that becomes a real issue in relocation, is when you have a teenager who might be involved in an extracurricular or a job, or their peers, they don't want to go spend a summer in another place for weeks and weeks on end. And that is very hard. And a lot of times I think parenting plans set the parent who's moved up for real failure, because they're not addressing what the child is really going to want to be doing in their summer.
Yeah, and that is a hard part, especially as you said, when they get to be teenagers, and once they start driving and they can actually, I don't know, maybe it just depends.
Oh, it definitely depends.
Because it depends where someone is living, right? Let's say someone relocated. Let's say someone was in Hawaii and they're like, yeah, sure, I want to spend summers in Hawaii with my dad.
Sounds great.
Right?
As opposed to maybe like small town, I don't know, Indiana or something, or some really hot, buggy place. Like they might not be all into that. It all just, it so depends on the children, what happens. But I think attorneys and professionals that work with families, we have to dig into all those things. That we can't just be creating parenting plans in any type of cookie cutter way, because I think we do a real disservice to the children who are subjected to those.
It's definitely tough, for sure. A good parenting plan will take you a while to create. So going back to the parenting coordinator, so it just almost kind of is it safe to call the parenting coordinator almost like a mediator between the parties? I know you use the word buffer. Is buffer more appropriate?
I would say buffer, yes. I mean, is because a mediator, I think of a mediator as somebody who's really trying to get people to the middle and trying to kind of, especially in a facilitative mediation, really kind of bringing their expertise and their opinion, and they're kind of, really trying to move them. I don't know that I try to move them. Like I have to accept that they are where they are. I have to try to help them be able to hear each other and make sure they have all the data needed where they can make a decision. Then if they're not able to still make it, I'm just going to make it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. 1 second, I gotta close my door. A dog came in and opened up my door.
Oh yes, the joys of our Zoom life with our pets, kids, cats.
I'm like, I thought that door was closed, and then I felt a dog licking my feet, and I was like, dang it. I guess they pushed the door open with their nose. Jeez.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so definitely a buffer. And just in terms, what's an idea of cost in terms of parenting coordinator? Do people put like a retainer down and then they work out of that?
Yes, usually that's how it works. And I would say the cost is heaviest in that first month, because the parenting coordinator is getting to know the parties, reading the documents and such. And then depending on how much they use the parenting coordinator, obviously that, will dictate the cost. And in some families, like, with COVID, I've had several cases where there's been issues around vaccinations and, whether the child should go back to in-person school. So those
Oh,
costs are raised, for certain reasons. And then we might go for months and months and have no costs, like because they're not having conflicts about anything. So it really just depends. It's very cyclical though. Like the holidays often bring out costs, school, going back to school, changing schools, those types of things. And then often another area is medical providers and therapy, like who gets to choose the therapist and can they agree on a therapist? That's often an issue that people kind of bump against.
and what would the parenting coordinator retainer, would that range from about maybe 3,500 to 6,500?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, to be honest, I'd have to look at my own fee agreement to know exactly what it is, but I would say, yeah, I mean, I would think it's around between $5,000 and $7,000
Okay.
for a retainer for a parenting coordinator.
Yeah, and especially too, because like you said, I get what you're saying in that first month, especially. It might be a little bit more, but once, almost in a way, when people settle to routine, then
Exactly.
the cost stops to go down. And
Absolutely.
do you know what generally is the hourly rate?
I guess I don't. I mean, I
Okay.
don't know what everyone's hourly rate is, but I'm,
Okay.
it's probably depends on what their experience is, whether they're an attorney, or just a mental health professional. Like there's different, because some people will seek out a parenting coordinator that's a mental health professional or maybe has some expertise in some, like maybe you have a special needs child. And so
Okay.
that might be, up an alley for a particular expertise.
Right. Just, and so it's that range, like the guardian items, just depending
Exactly.
on a person's certification and expertise and background.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in that, $200 to $350
Right.
an hour kind of range.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Um, any final last words about tips about working with a parenting coordinator?
I mean, I guess my only tip would be to not be scared of it. People who
Oh,
don't know about it, it would be to try to really educate yourself about parenting coordination and see how it can help the clients you're working with, because I think all of us practitioners, we've all found ourselves in situations where we look at the conflict and we're kind of stunned by the how much it is, how
yeah,
deep seated it is, and how damaging it is. And we
definitely.
often, as practitioners, have a hard time seeing how are we ever going to get out of that. But sometimes getting fresh new eyes and somebody who's trained in parenting coordination, I mean, you really can move people from that. And that is very powerful for families, who are used to just
Right.
high conflict mess.
And not only that, it's just, I think, I mean, it frankly, it breaks my heart as a family law attorney to see that level of high conflict, because I know ultimately it's hurting the kids. But, the law doesn't allow you to fix that.
No.
Um, and that's why having that parenting coordinator is a really important piece. And the only thing I can make suggestions as an attorney is, see a family, what is it called? I'm
Like
losing my,
family systems therapist.
yeah, something like that. Or just because sometimes people see therapists and they don't realize you need to have that license where it's a family, marriage, and licensed
Yeah.
therapist.
Uh-huh.
Someone who
Licensed family,
specializes.
yeah.
Say that again?
LFMT, a licensed family and marriage therapist.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
but
the
it
one.
makes a real difference. And I think that the other thing I think, and I try to help people understand, is when you're enmeshed in this conflict, you're not able to move on from your divorce. Your divorce becomes traumatic rather than transformational. And I always want my clients to have transformational divorces where they can look and see them operating as their best selves on the other side, not mired in trauma and conflict constantly, because that's just going to tear somebody down. And that's never going to benefit the children if the parents are tearing each other down. I mean, it's hard enough to parent. Do you know what I mean? Like, as a solid functioning person, parenting is tough.
Wow. Powerful words from you, Elise Buie. Goodness. Okay, and then you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going through a divorce, get that book, Fair Play by Eve Rodsky, Rodsky. And Elise, how can people get a hold of you if they need to work with you as a parenting coordinator, or if they just need help with family law and divorce in general?
Well, they could just look at our website at Elise Buie Family Law, and we'd be happy to talk with them.
And Buie is spelled B-U-I-E, folks.
Yeah.
And Elise, Elise is E-L-I-S-E. Well, thank you so much, Elise, for coming back for a second time and talking about parenting coordinators. Really appreciate your time and this wealth of information that you shared. I know I learned so much about the guardian ad litem process and additionally parenting coordinators as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you for listening and stay safe and healthy.
The information in this podcast is general advice only and should not in any respect be relied on as specific legal advice.